The first time I helped kill a man, my hands did not shake. That is what haunts me most. Not the act itself, but the unnerving steadiness of my hands as I wrote the false diagnosis, as I advised on dosages, as I watched Henry Beauchamp die by inches and did nothing to stop it. A physician's hand sworn to preserve life should tremble when they betray their oath. Mine did not, and in that terrible steadiness, I found both my damnation and my salvation, a paradox that has defined every waking moment since. My name is Dr. Alastair Finch, and this is my confession. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1824 into a family that valued intellect and moral rectitude above all else. My father was a professor of philosophy at Harvard, a man of stern principles and a booming voice that could fill any lecture hall. My mother, though quieter, possessed an equally sharp mind and a deep commitment to social justice. Our home was a haven of books and spirited debate, and music, where the great moral questions of the age, temperance, women's suffrage, and above all abolition, were discussed with passionate conviction. I grew up steeped in the ideals of human dignity and freedom, believing unequivocally in the inherent worth of every individual. I pursued medicine with a similar fervor, drawn by the promise of science to alleviate suffering and extend life. I studied at Harvard Medical School, poring over anatomical texts, dissecting cadavers, learning the intricate dance of the human body. I took the Hippocratic Oath with a solemn heart, vowing to do no harm and to apply my knowledge for the benefit of the sick. I envisioned a life of service, a life dedicated to healing, a life that would uphold the noble principles instilled in me since childhood. But life, as I would soon discover, rarely conforms to our carefully constructed ideals. My father died unexpectedly in 1854, leaving behind not the modest inheritance we expected, but a tangle of debts incurred through ill-advised investments. Suddenly I, the eldest son, was responsible for my widowed mother and two younger sisters. My meager earnings from a fledgling practice in Boston were insufficient to keep us afloat. The abolitionist pamphlets I had once distributed with such conviction now seemed a luxury I could ill afford. It was then that I saw the advertisement in a medical journal. Physician wanted for a thriving Southern community. Excellent remuneration, opportunity for substantial practice. The South, the very word conjured images of the peculiar institution I so vehemently opposed. Yet the promise of excellent remuneration was a siren song I could not ignore. I rationalized my decision with 1,000 internal arguments. I could save enough money to bring my family north. I could perhaps subtly make a difference from within the system. I could at the very least provide medical care to those who desperately needed it, regardless of their station. I told myself that my hands, trained to heal, could remain untainted by the moral compromises of the land. I was a fool, blinded by necessity and self-deception. The journey south in the spring of 1855 was a slow, agonizing descent into a world I barely recognized. The familiar brick buildings and bustling docks of Boston gave way to the rolling hills of Virginia. Then the flat, humid plains of Georgia. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of magnolia and something else, something indefinable, a pervasive odor of oppression that seemed to cling to the very soil. I settled in a small town in Tolbert County, Georgia, a place of dusty streets, clap houses, and a pervasive sense of lang belied the brutal efficiency of the surrounding plantations. My practice grew quickly. I treated poor white farmers for malaria and consumption, their bodies ravaged by hard labor and poor diet. I attended to the ailments of the planter class, their gout and dyspepsia, the predictable consequences of lives of excess, and inevitably I treated slaves. My first experiences in the slave quarters were a shock to my Bostonian sensibilities. I had read the abolitionist tracts, but nothing prepared me for the reality. I saw backs crossed with whip scars, bodies broken by overwork, minds dulled by despair. I set bones that had been deliberately fractured, stitched wounds inflicted by overseers, delivered babies into a world of bondage. I learned to compartmentalize, to focus solely on the physical ailment, to ignore the systemic violence that caused it. I told myself I was a physician, not a reformer. My duty was to heal bodies, not to dismantle institutions. My colleague, Dr. Hutchkins, was the other physician in the county, an elderly man whose medical philosophy seemed rooted in the Dark Ages. He favored bleeding, purges, and copious amounts of laudanum for every ailment, from a toothache to a broken leg. He was a man of his time, utterly unburdened by moral qualms about slavery, viewing slaves as property to be kept healthy enough to work. Nothing more. I often found myself clashing with him, my modern medical training at odds with his antiquated methods. But I learned to hold my tongue, to pick my battles. I needed to survive in this world to earn my living. I had visited Beauchamp Hall several times before Henry Beauchamp's final illness. It was a place that always left me with a chill even on the hottest days. The house itself, a grand Greek revival mansion, seemed to exude an aura of cold, calculating power. Master Beauchamp, a man of formidable presence and legendary cruelty, was a frequent patient, suffering from various complaints brought on by his gluttonous lifestyle. I had seen him rage at his slaves, witnessed the casual brutality with which he enforced his will. I had seen the fear in the eyes of his house servants, the way they moved like shadows, their faces carefully blank. I had seen the scars on the backs of the field hands, scars that spoke of unspeakable suffering, and each time I had left Botch Hall with a knot in my stomach, my conscience gnawing at me, my carefully constructed justifications beginning to fray. I had treated slaves from Beauchamp Hall before. I had set broken bones and stitched wounds and delivered babies in the quarters, while pretending not to see the scars that covered their backs like obscene maps of suffering. I had taken Beauchamp's money and said nothing, telling myself that I was just a physician, that my duty was to heal bodies, not to judge souls, that I could remain neutral in a system that permitted no neutrality. I was a coward and a fool, but I did not know it yet. Not truly. The urgent summons from Beauchamp Hall arrived in the autumn of 1855. The message was delivered by a breathless slave boy who had run the 5 mi to my practice in town. Master Beauchamp was gravely ill. Come at once. Bring your instruments. I knew Henry Beauchamp by reputation, as everyone in the county did. He was a man whose cruelty had achieved a kind of legendary status, spoken of in whispers by slaves and poor whites alike, acknowledged with uncomfortable silence by the planter class, who benefited from the system he embodied in its most brutal form. He was 52 years old, a widower, childless, and he ran his plantation with an iron fist and a whip that was never far from his hand. There were stories: a slave who had stolen a chicken to feed his starving children, hanged as an example. A woman who had talked back, her tongue cut out. A man who had tried to run, brought back and beaten so severely that he never walked properly again. These were not rumors or exaggerations. These were facts documented in the county records, witnessed by neighbors, accepted as the natural prerogative of a master over his property. The ride to Beauchamp Hall took an hour through countryside that was beautiful in the way that poisonous things can be beautiful, lush and green and thriving on blood. The cotton fields stretched to the horizon, white with the harvest that would make BAW even wealthier than he already was. Slaves moved through the rows in the late afternoon sun, their movements mechanical with exhaustion, their songs rising and falling in rhythms that seemed older than the land itself, mournful and defiant. The house was a monument to excess, A Greek revival mansion with columns that rose 3 stories, imported marble, and furnishings that had cost more than most men would earn in a lifetime. I was met at the door by the butler, an elderly man named Moses, whose eyes were carefully blank as he led me upstairs to the master's bedroom. Moses had been at Beauchamp Hall for decades, a silent observer of generations of cruelty. His face, etched with 1,000 unspoken stories, was a testament to endurance. The smell hit me before I entered the room. The sweet, sickly odor of illness mixed with something else, something I could not immediately identify. Henry Beauchamp lay in a massive 4-poster bed, his body diminished beneath expensive linens, his face the color of old parchment. He had always been a large man, thick with muscle, and the kind of robust health that comes from good food and no labor. Now he looked shrunken, hollowed out as if something were eating him from the inside. "About time you got here, Finch," he rasped, his voice weak, but still carrying the edge of command. "I've been dying for 3 weeks, and that fool Hutchkins couldn't tell me what's wrong. Said it was my liver. My liver. I don't drink any more than any other gentleman." He coughed, a wet rattling sound that seemed to tear at his lungs. "Tell me about your symptoms," I said, setting down my medical bag and approaching the bed. The room was stifling, the heavy velvet curtains drawn against the afternoon sun trapping the stale air and the pervasive scent of decay. "When did this begin?" 5, maybe 6 weeks ago, Boshin said, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for something unseen. "Started with weakness. Couldn't get through a full day without needing to rest. Then the headaches came and the dreams." He paused, his eyes unfocusing, a shiver running through his emaciated frame. "God, the dreams. I see things, Finch. Terrible things. Things I've done, things I've forgotten. They come back at night and I can't escape them. Faces. So many faces. They whisper my name." I noted the tremor in his hands, the slight yellowing of his eyes, the way his skin seemed to hang loose on his frame, as if he had lost significant weight in a short time. His hair, once thick and dark, was now thin and stray with gray, plastered to his forehead with sweat. Any nausea, vomiting. Some more in the mornings in my mind. He tapped his temple with a shaking finger, his brow furrowed in confusion. "It's not right. I forget things. I'll be in the middle of giving orders, and suddenly I can't remember what I was saying. Yesterday, I couldn't remember the name of my own overseer. I've known the man for 10 years. It's like my thoughts are slipping through my fingers." I conducted a thorough examination, checking his pulse, his pupils, the color of his tongue, the texture of his skin. His heartbeat was irregular, a faint flutter beneath my fingertips. His breathing was shallow, punctuated by gasps. His abdomen was tender, but not distended. His reflexes were sluggish, almost non-existent. The symptoms were consistent with several possible diagnoses: liver disease, kidney failure, a tumor of the brain. But something about the presentation troubled me. The progression was too steady, too methodical, too perfectly aligned with a slow, inexorable decline. Natural diseases have their own rhythms, their own patterns of advance and retreat, of remission and relapse. This felt different. This felt deliberate. "Who prepares your food?" I asked, my gaze sweeping the room, searching for clues. "The kitchen staff, same as always." "Why? And your medicines? Are you taking anything?" "Just the tonics Hutchkins prescribed and the tea." He gestured weakly toward the bedside table, where a cup sat half empty, steam still rising from its surface, filling the air with a complex earthy aroma. "Zora makes it for me, says it will help with the weakness. Some kind of African remedy her grandmother taught her. She's been with me for years. A good hand, Zora." I had not noticed her until that moment, standing so still in the corner of the room that she seemed part of the shadows, a silent sentinel. She was young, perhaps 25, with skin the color of polished mahogany and eyes that were carefully downcast in the presence of white men. She wore the simple dress of a house slave, clean but worn, and her hands were clasped in front of her in an attitude of patient waiting, an almost unnatural stillness. "You're his nurse?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper devoid of inflection. "Master Beauchamp, he asked for me special, said I had gentle hands, said I knew how to make his teas just right." There was something in the way she said it, a flatness in her tone, a subtle emphasis on certain words that made me look at her more closely, but her face revealed nothing. She was a mask of servile obedience, exactly what a slave was supposed to be in the presence of her master, a perfect performance. "I'd like to examine that tea," I said, reaching for the cup. Bump waved his hand dismissively. "It's just herbs, Finch. Nothing harmful. Zora's been taking care of me for years. She's the only one I trust. She's a good, loyal girl, the only one he trusted." The irony of that statement spoken by a man who had earned the hatred of every soul under his dominion would not become clear to me until later. I took the cup and sniffed its contents. The smell was complex mint and something bitter, something earthy, something I could not immediately identify. It was not unpleasant, but it was certainly potent. "What's in this?" I asked Zora, holding the cup out to her. "Chamomile, sir," she said, her eyes still downcast, her voice a soft murmur. "And peppermint, and some roots my grandmother used for strength, for calming the nerves. Nothing that would hurt Master Beauchamp. I would never hurt him. I am his devoted servant." The way she said it, with such careful emphasis, such precise wording, made something cold move through my chest. It was too perfect, too rehearsed. But I had no evidence, no reason to suspect anything beyond a sick man and a devoted servant trying to help him. My rational mind, trained in the empirical methods of science, demanded proof. I spent the next hour conducting tests, drawing blood, examining urine samples, checking for all the common poisons, arsenic, mercury, strychnine. I used the rudimentary chemical tests available to me, but everything came back negative. Whatever was afflicting Henry Beauchamp, it was not any poison I could detect with the tools available to me. It was a testament to the limitations of 19th century medicine and perhaps to the genius of the poisoner. "I need to observe you for a few days," I told Beauchamp. "I'll stay here at the house, monitor your condition, see if I can determine what's causing this decline. It's a complex case, Master Beauchamp. A rare fever perhaps, or a cerebral inflammation. I need more time." He agreed readily, desperate for any hope of recovery, clinging to the promise of a diagnosis, however grim. A room was prepared for me, a guest room on the ground floor, and I settled in to watch and wait, my medical bag open, my mind racing. Over the next 3 days, I observed everything. I watched Zora prepare Beauchamp's meals, brew his tea, administer his medicines. I watched her tend to him with a gentleness that seemed genuine, adjusting his pillows, wiping his brow, speaking to him in soothing tones when the nightmares came. I watched her move through the house like a ghost, silent and efficient, always present but never intrusive. Her presence a constant, unsettling shadow, and I watched Bond deteriorate. The weakness grew worse, his once powerful frame now barely able to support itself. The confusion deepened, his sentences trailing off into incoherence, his memory failing him with increasing frequency. The nightmares became more frequent and more vivid, leaving him gasping and crying out in the darkness. His screams echoing through the silent house. He began to see things that were not there, shadows moving in corners, faces at the windows, hands reaching for him from beneath the bed. He would call out names of slaves he had long since sold or beaten to death, names that sent shivers down my spine. On the fourth day, my suspicions solidified. I followed Zora to the kitchen garden, a small walled enclosure filled with herbs and vegetables. She did not know I was watching as she moved among the plants, her movements fluid and purposeful, selecting leaves and roots with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. I recognized some of them: chamomile, mint, valerian lavender, but others were unfamiliar plants I had never seen in any medical text or botanical guide. They were indigenous to Africa, I realized, or perhaps hybridized over generations in the slave quarters, their properties known only to a select few. I watched her gather a handful of leaves from a plant, with small dark berries, then carefully dig up a gnarled root from another. She placed them in a small basket, her face serene, her movements unhurried. It was a ritual, I realized, a sacred act of preparation. That evening I confronted her. I waited until she was alone in the still room, a small detached building, where she dried herbs and prepared remedies, and I closed the door behind me, the latch clicking with a finality that echoed in the quiet room. "What are you giving him?" I asked, my voice low, barely above a whisper. She did not look up from her work, her back to me. She was grinding dried leaves in a mortar, the rhythmic rasping sound filling the silence. "Herbs, sir, for his strength, for his sleep." "What kind of herbs?" I pressed, stepping closer, my shadow falling over her. "My grandmother's remedies from Africa. They help with weakness and pain. They calm the spirit. They're killing him." Her hands stilled, the rasping sound ceased. For a long moment, she did not move, her back still to me, her shoulders rigid. Then slowly, deliberately, she turned. And in that moment, the mask fell away. I saw in her eyes a depth of intelligence and calculation that took my breath away. I saw rage carefully controlled and precisely directed. I saw determination and grief, and a kind of terrible patience that had been honed over a lifetime of suffering. "Yes," she said simply, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. The word hung in the air between us like smoke, thick and suffocating. I should have been shocked. I should have been horrified. I should have immediately gone to the authorities, reported what I had discovered, fulfilled my duty as a physician and a citizen. My training, my upbringing, my very moral fiber screamed at me to act. But I was not shocked. Somewhere deep inside, I had known. I had seen the signs and chosen not to recognize them, chosen to avert my gaze from the terrible truth. And now, faced with the undeniable reality, I found that I wanted to understand before I acted. I wanted to hear her story. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes piercing, measuring me, deciding how much to reveal, how much to trust. Then she spoke, her voice still quiet, but no longer subservient, imbued with a quiet power that commanded my attention. "My name is Zora," she began, her gaze unwavering. "I was born on a plantation in South Carolina. My grandmother was a healer, a woman of great wisdom and knowledge brought from the Gold Coast. She taught my mother, and my mother taught me. We learned the language of the plants, the secrets of the earth, the ways to heal and the ways to change things." She paused, her hands resuming their work, grinding herbs in a mortar with steady, rhythmic movements, each stroke a punctuation mark in her story. 3 years ago, Master Boschum bought my husband Jacob from that plantation in South Carolina. Jacob was a blacksmith, strong and skilled, with hands that could shape iron and a heart that was gentle. Master Beauchamp needed a blacksmith. Jacob was happy to come here, because it meant we could be together. We had been separated for 5 years, sold to different masters after our first child died. We thought this was a blessing, a chance to rebuild our lives. Her voice remained steady, but I saw her knuckles whiten as she gripped the pestle, the muscles in her forearms tensing. Jacob was a good man, a gentle man. He worked hard. He never caused trouble. He was respected even by the white men who used his skills. But one day, Master Beauchamp's favorite horse threw a shoe. Jacob was shoeing another horse, a mare in foal, and said he would get to the master's horse as soon as he finished. Master Boone said that was unacceptable, that his horse came first, that Jacob was being insolent, that a slave had no right to prioritize his work over his master's whim. She looked up at me again, and I saw tears in her eyes, but her voice did not waver. Her gaze remained fixed on mine. Master Beauchamp had Jacob whipped, 50 lashes for insolence, 50 lashes, Dr. Finch, for daring to finish his work. Jacob's back was torn open, a bloody mess. I begged to be allowed to tend to him, to clean his wounds, to apply the peccases my grandmother taught me. But Master Beauchamp said no. He said Jacob needed to learn his lesson. He said the wounds would heal on their own. He said a slave who defied him deserved to suffer. Her voice cracked, then a raw, guttural sound of pain that pierced through my carefully constructed detachment. They didn't heal. They got infected. Jacob got fever. He was strong. He fought it for 2 weeks. His body burning, his mind delirious. But the infection spread to his blood. I watched him die, Dr. Finch. I held him while he burned with fever and begged for water that I was not allowed to give him. I watched the light go out of his eyes, watched his last breath leave his body, knowing that I could have saved him if I had only been allowed. And Master Beauchamp never even came to see him, never even acknowledged that he had killed a man over a horseshoe. He simply bought another blacksmith. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant chirping of crickets. I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic drum in my ears. I could hear the sound of my breathing ragged and shallow. I could hear the grinding of the pestle in the mortar as Zora returned to her work, her movements now imbued with a terrible, deliberate rhythm. "So you're poisoning him," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I am giving him justice," she replied, her eyes fixed on the herbs, her voice calm, almost serene. "The law will not give it to me. God seems to have forgotten us. So I am giving it to myself and to Jacob and to all the others he has broken." "How?" I asked, my scientific curiosity wearing with my moral revulsion. She gestured to the plants spread out on the table before her, a verdant array of leaves, roots, and dried flowers. My grandmother was a healer in Africa. She taught my mother. My mother taught me these plants individually are harmless. Some are even beneficial. This one, she picked up a leaf, calms the stomach. This root, she held up a gnarled piece of ginger, eases pain. But together, in the right combinations, in precise dosages over time, they create something else. Something that mimics a wasting disease. Something that slowly attacks the nervous system, the liver, the brain. Something that cannot be detected by your tests or your instruments. It is a slow poison, Dr. Finch, a patient poison. It allows the body to betray itself. I stared at the plants, at the careful arrangement of leaves and roots and flowers, and I felt a kind of awe at the sophistication of what she had created. This was not crude poisoning, not the desperate act of someone lashing out in blind rage. This was science. This was medicine used in reverse, applied with the same precision and knowledge that I used to heal, but with a purpose that defied every ethical boundary I had ever known. "How long?" I asked, my voice. "Another 2 weeks, perhaps 3. He will grow weaker. The confusion will worsen. The nightmares will consume him. Eventually, his heart will simply stop. His body will give out. It will look like a natural death. No one will suspect anything. Not Dr. Hutchkins, not the other planters, not the authorities. They will simply say he succumbed to a rare brain fever just as you diagnosed." "Accept me, accept you," she agreed, her gaze meeting mine, steady and unafraid. "What will you do, Dr. Finch?" It was the question I had been asking myself since the moment she had said yes. What would I do? What should I do? My oath as a physician was clear. First, do no harm. My duty as a citizen was clear. Report a crime. My conscience as a human being should have been clear. Murder is wrong regardless of the justification. But nothing was clear. Nothing was simple. The moral landscape of the South was a tangled, poisonous thicket. And every path seemed to lead to compromise. I thought about Jacob dying of an infected wound that could have been prevented with basic medical care, killed as surely as if Boschum had put a gun to his head. I thought about all the other slaves I had treated over the years, all the broken bones and torn flesh and preventable deaths that were the daily reality of the system I lived in and benefited from. I thought about the law that said a man could own another human being, could work them to death, could beat them and rape them and kill them with impunity as long as they were considered property. And I thought about Henry Beauchamp, lying in his bed upstairs, tormented by nightmares of the things he had done, dying slowly and in fear, finally experiencing a fraction of the suffering he had inflicted on others. Was this not a form of justice, however brutal, however outside the bounds of law? I need time to think, I said finally, my voice barely audible. Zora nodded. You have until tomorrow morning. That's when you'll need to give your official report to the overseer. Whatever you decide, I will accept. I am not afraid to die. I have already lost everything that mattered to me. My life is forfeit either way. But his life, it is a debt that must be paid. I left the still room and walked out into the night, my mind churning with questions that had no good answers. The plantation was quiet, the slaves locked in their quarters, the fields empty under a sky full of stars that seemed to mock the darkness below with their indifferent beauty. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant woods. I walked for hours pacing the grounds, wrestling with my conscience, trying to find some moral clarity in a situation that seemed designed to destroy any possibility of moral certainty. Every argument I made to myself had a counterargument. Every principle I tried to apply seemed to collapse under the weight of context and consequence. If I reported Zora, she would be hanged. That was certain. The law was clear on the subject of slaves who murdered their masters. It did not matter that Bashar had killed her husband. It did not matter that she had no legal recourse, no way to seek justice through legitimate channels. She would die, and her death would serve as a warning to every other slave who might dare to resist their oppression. Her death would be a triumph for the very system I abhorred. If I said nothing, Beauchamp would die. A man would be murdered, and I would be complicit in that murder. I would have violated every principle I claimed to hold, every oath I had taken, every standard of civilized behavior. My hands sworn to heal would have facilitated death. But was it murder? Or was it justice? Was there a difference? Could there be a difference in a system that denied justice to an entire class of people based solely on the color of their skin? Was the law itself not a crime when it protected such atrocities? I thought about the Hippocratic oath I had taken when I became a physician. First, do no harm. But what did that mean in a world where harm was woven into the very fabric of society? Was it more harmful to let Beauchamp die, or to let Zora hang? Was it more harmful to be complicit in one death, or complicit in a system that caused thousands? My mind reeled, caught in a vortex of moral relativism. I had no answers. I had only questions that spiraled deeper and deeper into moral ambiguity, each one more unsettling than the last. The stars above seemed to mock my intellectual struggles, their cold, indifferent light shining down on a world where human suffering was an accepted fact. As dawn broke over the plantation, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. I made my decision. It was not a decision based on principle or ethics, or any clear moral reasoning. It was a decision based on something more fundamental. Something I had not even known existed within me until that moment. A visceral refusal to be an instrument of further injustice. I decided that I could not be the instrument of Zora's death. Whatever else I was, whatever else I might become, I could not be that. I could not be the one who condemned her. I returned to the house, my steps heavy, my heart a lean weight in my chest. I went to my room, pulled out my medical journal, and wrote my report. I diagnosed Henry Beauchamp with a rare degenerative condition of the brain, likely caused by a tumor or a progressive neurological disease. I noted that such conditions were poorly understood and inevitably fatal. I recommended palliative care to ease his suffering and predicted that he had perhaps a month to live. I used all the medical jargon I knew, all the scientific authority I possessed to construct a narrative that was both plausible and utterly false. Then I went to the still room and found Zora preparing the morning tea, her face impassive, her movements precise. "I'm not going to report you," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. She looked at me, her face carefully neutral, betraying no surprise, no relief. "Why not?" "Because I can't," I said simply, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Because I've seen too much. Because I've been complicit in this system for too long. Because if I report you, I'm choosing to protect a murderer by condemning someone seeking justice in the only way available to her, and I cannot do that. I cannot be the one to send you to the gallows." "Master Beauchamp is the murderer," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on mine. "I know." She studied me for a long moment, her gaze piercing, searching. "You understand what you're doing? You're helping me kill him. You're becoming an accomplice." "I understand. You'll have to live with that, with the knowledge of what you've done, with the weight of his death on your conscience." "I know." She nodded slowly, a subtle movement that conveyed a world of understanding. "Then I will tell you what you need to know. The dosage must be precise, too much, and the symptoms will be too severe, too obvious, too little, and he will recover, and then we will both be in danger. I will show you the plants and the proportions. You will need to monitor him to adjust the treatment based on his response. You are the physician, Dr. Finch. You will make it look natural." And so I became complicit in murder. I became the physician who helped a slave kill her master. I became the man who betrayed his oath and his duty and every principle of civilized society, and my hands did not shake. Over the next 3 weeks, I visited Beauchamp Hall every day. I monitored Henry Beauchamp's decline with the same careful attention I would have given to any patient, except that instead of trying to cure him, I was ensuring that he died slowly and naturally. I consulted with Zora on dosages and timing, discussing the subtle changes in Beauchamp's condition, the efficacy of the various herbal compounds. I adjusted the mixture of herbs based on his symptoms, ensuring a steady, inexorable progression. I wrote careful notes in my medical journal, documenting the progression of a disease that did not exist, creating a meticulously crafted lie that would fool any other physician, and I watched Henry Beauchamp die. It was not an easy death. The herbs Zora used did not simply stop his heart or put him to sleep. They created a slow dissolution, a gradual unraveling of mind and body that gave him time to understand what was happening to him. The weakness became profound. His once powerful body reduced to a skeletal frame. The confusion deepened into full-blown delirium, his mind a fractured landscape of fear and regret. The nightmares grew worse, becoming waking visions that tormented him day and night. He saw the faces of the people he had hurt, heard their cries, felt their pain as if it were his own. "They're here," He would whisper, his eyes wide with terror, clawing at the air. All of them, Jacob, Sarah, old Moses's boy. They're waiting for me. They're going to drag me down to hell. They're reaching for me. I gave him laudanum for the pain and the fear, but not enough to grant him oblivion. Zora had been clear about that. He needed to be conscious. He needed to understand. He needed to experience what he had inflicted on others. It was a cruel justice, but a justice nonetheless. Is this what Jacob felt? I asked Zora one evening as we stood outside Bam's room, listening to his tormented cries echoing through the silent house. No, she said quietly, her face etched with a profound sadness. Jacob's suffering was physical. The whip, the fever. This is different. This is the suffering of the soul. This is what it feels like to finally see yourself clearly and to understand what you have done. This is the weight of his own sins crushing him. Is that justice? It's the only justice I can give him and the only justice he will ever receive. It is the only way to balance the scales. In his lucid moments, which became increasingly rare, Basham would sometimes talk to me. He seemed to sense that his time was short, that the end was near, and he wanted to confess, to unburden himself of the weight of his sins. I've done terrible things, Finch, he said one afternoon, his voice weak and trembling, his eyes filled with a desperate plead for understanding. Things I justified at the time, things I told myself were necessary for the running of the plantation, for the order of things. But they weren't necessary. They were cruel. I was cruel. I was a monster. Why? I asked, though I was not sure I wanted to know the answer, fearing what depths of depravity I might uncover. Because I could be, he said simply, tears streaming down his withered cheeks. Because the law said they were property. Because everyone around me did the same. Because it was easier to be cruel than to be kind. Because cruelty made me feel powerful. It made me feel like a god. And I liked that feeling. Finch, God forgive me, I liked it. He closed his eyes, his body racked by a spasm of coughing. I remember every face, every person I hurt, every lash, every scream. I thought I had forgotten them, buried them deep, but I hadn't. They were always there, waiting in the shadows of my mind. And now they've come for me. They're pulling me down. I said nothing. There was nothing to say, no absolution I could offer, no comfort that would not be a lie. His suffering was his own, a harvest of his own sowing. Tell them I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Tell them I know what I did. Tell them I'm sorry. But there was no one to tell. The people he had hurt were scattered or dead, their suffering unacknowledged, their pain unrecorded except in their own memories and the memories of those who loved them. Their stories were lost to the official histories, but not to the earth, not to the wind, and certainly not to Zora. Henry Beauchamp died on a Tuesday morning in late October, as the first frost touched the fields, and the slaves were bringing in the last of the cotton harvest. He died quietly, his heart simply stopping as he slept, his face peaceful for the first time in weeks. The torment finally over. Zora found him and called for me, and I examined him and pronounced him dead of natural causes, a victim of the degenerative brain disease I had diagnosed weeks before. No one questioned my judgment. No one suspected anything. Dr. Hutchkins, after a cursory examination, agreed with my diagnosis, muttering about the mysterious ways of the brain. The funeral was well attended, with neighboring planters praising Beauchamp's business acumen and his contributions to the prosperity of the county. They did not mention his cruelty. They did not speak of the people he had killed or maimed or destroyed. Those things were not considered worthy of mention in polite society. Beauchamp Hall was sold to pay his debts. The slaves were auctioned off, families separated, Lives disrupted once again by the casual cruelty of a system that treated human beings as commodities. I tried to buy Zora to give her her freedom, but she was sold before I could make an offer. Purchased by a planter from Alabama, who needed a skilled nurse for his ailing wife. She vanished into the vast churning moor of the slave trade. Another face in the endless procession of the dispossessed. I never saw her again, but I never forgot her. I never forgot the intelligence in her eyes, the precision of her planning, the terrible patience with which she had pursued justice in a world that denied her any legal recourse. I never forgot that she had trusted me with her secret, had given me the power to destroy her, and that I had chosen not to use it. And I never forgot the weight of that choice. The years that followed were difficult ones. The country was sliding toward war, the tensions over slavery reaching a breaking point that everyone could feel, but no one seemed able to prevent. I continued my practice treating patients, delivering babies, setting bones, doing the work of a country physician. But I was changed. I could no longer pretend neutrality. I could no longer tell myself that I was just a doctor, that my duty was only to heal bodies and not to concern myself with the moral dimensions of the society I lived in. The ghost of Jacob, the tormented cries of B.A., and the unwavering gaze of Zora haunted my every step. I began to speak out against slavery carefully at first, then more boldly. I wrote articles for abolitionist newspapers under a pseudonym, a Southern physician, detailing the horrors I had witnessed. I attended clandestine meetings of anti-slavery societies, risking my reputation and my livelihood. I helped slaves escape through the Underground Railroad, using my position as a physician to provide cover and assistance, forging travel documents, providing medical aid to runaways, hiding them in my own home. My quiet practice became a hub of resistance, a small flickering light in the vast darkness. And I told no one about Henry Beauchamp and Zora, that secret I kept locked in my heart, a burden I carried alone, a testament to the moral tightrope I walked. When the war came in 1861, I volunteered as a surgeon for the Union Army. I was too old for combat. My hands trained for precision, not for wielding a rifle. But I could still be useful, still contribute to the cause of ending the system that had corrupted everything it touched. I served in field hospitals from Bull Run to Appomattox, treating wounded soldiers, amputating shattered limbs, watching young men die far from home, their bodies broken by the very conflict I had once tried to avoid. The horrors of war were immense, but they were also, in a strange way, a form of absolution. In the chaos and suffering, I found a purpose, a way to atone for my past complicity. I treated all soldiers, Union and Confederate, white and black, with the same dedication driven by the Hippocratic oath I had once betrayed, but now sought to reclaim. And in the faces of the black soldiers who fought for the Union, the former slaves who had taken up arms to secure their own freedom, I saw echoes of Zora. I saw the same intelligence, the same determination, the same refusal to accept the limitations that others tried to impose on them. They were fighting for their lives, for their dignity, for a future that had been denied to them for generations. The war ended. Slavery ended. The 13th Amendment was ratified and 4 million people were freed from bondage. It was not the justice they deserved. That would take generations more to achieve if it ever fully came. But it was a beginning, a seismic shift that reshaped the very foundations of the nation. I returned to Georgia after the war, to a landscape transformed by violence and loss. Bam Hall was a ruin burned during Sherman's march to the sea. Its grand columns blackened, its marbles shattered. The fields were overgrown, the quarters empty, silent monuments to a vanished world. The world that had existed before the war was gone, swept away by the tide of history, leaving behind only ghosts and memories. I established a practice in Atlanta, a city rising from the ashes, treating both white and black patients, though the white patients often objected to sharing a waiting room with former slaves. I did not care. I had spent too many years being complicit in injustice. I would not be complicit any longer. My waiting room became a small defiant symbol of the new world I hoped to build. And I searched for Zora. I placed advertisements in newspapers across the South asking for information about a woman who had been sold from Beauchamp Hall in 1855, a skilled nurse and herbalist. I wrote to Freedmen's Bureau offices, to churches, to anyone who might have records or information. I spent money I could not afford and time I did not have, driven by a need I could not fully explain. A need to know if her act of resistance, her pursuit of justice had been worth the risk. I needed to know if she was free, if she had found peace. It took me 3 years, a long and arduous search filled with dead ends and false leads, but I finally found her. She was living in Savannah, a vibrant port city that had largely escaped the war's destruction. She was working as a midwife and healer, using the knowledge her grandmother had passed down to help women bring new life into the world. She had married again to a man named Samuel, a former Union soldier who had lost an arm at Gettysburg, but found a new purpose in advocating for freed men's rights. She had 2 children, a boy named Jacob after her first husband, and a girl named Clara, both attending a newly established school for freed men. Her home was a hub of community, a place of healing and hope. I traveled to Savannah to see her. I did not know what I would say, did not know if she would even remember me or want to see me, but I had to try. The weight of the secret, the need for closure, compelled me forward. She received me in her home, a small but neat house near the river, its porch adorned with potted plants and fragrant herbs. She was older, as we all were, her face lined with the passage of years and the weight of experience. But her eyes were the same, intelligent, watchful, missing nothing, still holding that quiet power. I remembered. "Dr. Finch," she said, her voice calm, devoid of surprise, as if she had been expecting me, as if she had known somehow that our paths would cross again. "It's been a long time." 13 years, I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I've been looking for you for a very long time." Why? It was the same question she had asked me that night in the still room, and I found that I still did not have a simple answer. "To know that you survived," I said finally, the words tumbling out. "To know that it was worth it, to know that you're free, to know that my choice, my complicity was not in vain." She looked at me for a long moment, her gaze unwavering, and then she smiled. It was the first time I had ever seen her truly smile, and it transformed her face, making her look younger, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from her soul. It was a smile of quiet triumph of hard-won peace. "I am free," she said, her voice resonant with conviction. "Not just because of the war, though that helped. I was free the moment I decided to fight back. I was free the moment I chose to act rather than to accept. I was free the moment I took control of my own life, even if it was only in that one small way. The chains were broken long before the Emancipation Proclamation." "I helped you kill a man?" I said, the confession still a raw wound in my soul. "I've carried that weight for 13 years. I need to know if it was the right thing to do, if I was right to betray my oath." She was quiet for a moment, considering my words, her eyes distant, as if reliving those terrible weeks. Then she said, "There is no right thing in a world built on wrong foundations, Dr. Finch. There are only choices and consequences and the courage to live with both. You made a choice. So did I. We both have to live with what we did. But I tell you this, I sleep soundly at night. Do you regret it?" "No," she said without hesitation, her voice firm. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that I lived in a world where that was the only justice available to me. I regret the pain, the suffering, the loss, but I do not regret the act itself. Henry Beauchamp was a murderer. He killed my husband and countless others. He died for his crimes, and the world is better for his absence. His death was a cleansing, and me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What about me? I betrayed my oath. I helped commit murder. What does that make me? A murderer, a hypocrite. She looked at me with something that might have been compassion, a deep understanding that transcended judgment. It makes you human, Dr. Finch. It makes you someone who chose to see me as a person rather than as property. Someone who chose justice over law. Someone who chose to be complicit in resistance rather than complicit in oppression. You made a choice, and it cost you something. It cost you your innocence, perhaps, but it also gave you something. It gave you the chance to be more than what you were. It gave you a path to true healing. We talked for hours that day about the past, and the present, and the uncertain future. She told me about her life, about the struggles of building a new existence in a world that was supposed to be different, but often was not. She told me about her children, about her hopes for them, about the world she wanted them to inherit, a world where no one would ever again be treated as property. She spoke of the challenges of establishing her practice, of the prejudice she faced, but also of the deep satisfaction of serving her community. And I told her about my work, about the patients I treated, about my efforts to build a practice that served everyone regardless of color. I told her about the nightmares I still had sometimes, about the weight of the secret I carried, about the question that haunted me. Had I done the right thing? Had I truly found redemption? The right thing is not always the same as the legal thing, she said, her wisdom profound. Or the safe thing or the easy thing. Sometimes the right thing is the hard thing, the dangerous thing, the thing that costs you everything. You did what you thought was right. That's all any of us can do. And sometimes that is enough. When I left Savannah, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had not found absolution. I was not sure such a thing existed for what I had done. But I had found something else. I had found confirmation that my choice had mattered, that it had made a difference, that it had helped one person claim their humanity and their freedom in a world that tried to deny both. I had found a measure of peace, a quiet acceptance of my own complicated truth. I am 72 years old now. I have been practicing medicine for over 40 years. I have delivered hundreds of babies, set countless bones, treated every illness and injury imaginable. I have saved lives and lost lives, and done my best to honor the oath I took so long ago. My practice in Atlanta thrives, testament to my dedication and my unwavering commitment to treating all people with dignity. I have mentored young black doctors, fought against segregation in hospitals, and continued to advocate for justice in a society still struggling with its past. But the most important thing I ever did as a physician was to choose not to heal, to choose to let a man die, to choose to be complicit in an act of resistance against a system that was itself a crime against humanity. I do not know if it was the right choice. I am not sure such certainty is possible in a world as complicated and morally ambiguous as ours. But I know it was my choice. I know I made it with open eyes and a full understanding of the consequences. And I know I would make it again. The first time I helped kill a man, my hands did not shake, and that steadiness, that certainty in the face of moral complexity, is the thing I am most proud of and most ashamed of in equal measure. It is the burden I will carry to my grave, and it is the gift that allowed one woman to claim her freedom and her humanity in a world that tried to deny her both. That is my confession. That is my testimony, and I offer it not as justification or excuse, but simply as truth. I was the physician who knew a slave was poisoning her master, and I said nothing. I did more than nothing. I helped, and in that help, I found both my damnation and my redemption. May history judge me as it will. I have already judged myself. Historical note. Dr. Alastair Finch died in 1903 in Atlanta, Georgia, where he had maintained a medical practice serving both white and black patients for over 30 years. He was known as a skilled physician and a tireless advocate for public health and education, particularly within the African American community. He helped establish several schools and clinics for the black community, often providing his services pro bono, and was a vocal supporter of civil rights long before such positions were popular or safe. His quiet defiance of segregationist practices in his own waiting room and his mentorship of young black medical students earned him both respect and scorn. In his will, he left his medical journals and personal papers to the Tuskegee Institute with instructions that they be sealed for 50 years after his death. When they were finally opened in 1953, they contained detailed documentation of his role in the death of Henry Boscham and his collaboration with a slave woman named Zora. The revelation caused considerable controversy, with some historians condemning him as a murderer and a betrayer of his medical oath, while others defended him as a man who chose justice over law in an unjust system, a quiet hero of the abolitionist cause. Records show that a woman named Zora Williams lived in Savannah, Georgia from 1868 until her death in 1897. She was a respected midwife and healer known for her profound knowledge of herbal medicine and her compassionate care. She delivered over 1,000 babies and trained dozens of other midwives, establishing a legacy of health and community care that endured for generations. Her children and grandchildren became teachers, doctors, and community leaders, contributing significantly to the advancement of African Americans in the post-Reconstruction South. Her great-great-granddaughter, Dr. Sarah Williams, became the first black woman to serve as Surgeon General of the United States in 2009, a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and resilience passed down through generations. Whether Dr. Finch's choice was morally justified remains a subject of intense debate among ethicists and historians, but there is no debate about the impact of that choice. By choosing to help Zora resist her oppression, he helped preserve a life that would touch thousands of others. By choosing justice over law, he demonstrated that moral courage sometimes requires us to violate the rules of an immoral system. His story reminds us that complicity takes many forms. We can be complicit in oppression by actively supporting it, or we can be complicit in resistance by refusing to stop it. In a world where neutrality is impossible, we must choose which side we will be complicit with. Dr. Finch made his choice. History must make its own judgment. The weight of Dr. Alastair Finch's choice shaped the rest of his life, transforming him from a passive observer into an active participant in the fight for justice. His story reveals that sometimes the most moral choice is the one that violates our oaths and our laws when those oaths and laws serve an immoral system. In a world where neutrality is complicity, we must choose which side of history we will stand on. If stories of moral courage and the complexity of justice fascinate you, subscribe to The Slave's Revenge for more narratives that challenge our understanding of right and wrong. What would you have done in Dr. Finch's place? Would you have reported Zora, or would you have helped her claim justice in the only way available?